welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue our conversation about generative AI today, and we're happy to have with us Bernhard Suhm, who's going to talk with us about some of the not only the advances in artificial intelligence and generative AI, but also the challenges. Bernhard has been involved with AI for his entire career, and you'll remember that when we met last, Marv pointed out that AI has been with us for something like 40 years. Most people don't realize it, but it's been part of our lives for quite a long while. It's changed dramatically in the last few years with the advent of generative AI and such things as ChatGPT, for example. But there are challenges, there are opportunities, and there are lots of things to talk about as we go forward with this. I want to take a moment before we begin, though, to just welcome to our presentation today a friend in Ukraine. Eugene Gorlikov is joining us today from Ukraine. He is involved with the Ukrainian resistance to the Russian aggression in that country. He has a short break and a little bit of a rest, and so he is able to join us today. And Eugene, I can tell you on behalf of all of us that we're delighted to see you and delighted to know that you're well. And we all have hopes for the right conclusion to that event, the events in Ukraine. We know you're an important part of it. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for a very, very warm welcome, sir. Thank you very much.
Bernhard, I'm gonna turn the floor over to you, and I have a question that I want to begin with. Why is it that ChatGPT cannot spell strawberry correctly? What's the reason for that, Bernhard?
Hold
You're on.
on, sorry.
Yeah.
I just changed a setting and I can't hear you guys anymore. So
We can see you and we can see your outline.
that's too bad. Hold on, I'll fix that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. So what about spelling strawberry? What's going on there?
Oh, really? I haven't noticed that problem.
Okay. Okay.
I'll look into it.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, well, thanks, Ron, for the kind introduction, and I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about, well, what's been my focus, at least for the last 2 years. As Ron mentioned, I've worked on some form of AI my whole career, starting, well, coming out of Carnegie Mellon, starting with speech recognition and then applying that to call centers. Well, when you hear on customer service calls, your call may be recorded or monitored. Sometimes we were listening there and looking for issues and trying to get the operators to change that. And then for a number of years, I worked at MathWorks. You may not know the spots on the radio it plays, MATLAB and Simulink to accelerate the pace of science and discovery. And then from there, I changed to Elastic, an internet search company. And so that really is the foundation of what I'm talking about here today. And well, I am picking up kind of where Marv left off last time. He showed this conversational system. Under the hood is AI. And well, I'm looking here at search experiences. At the far end of the spectrum, they may be conversational, like what Marv showed. At the other end of the spectrum, you just want to get an answer to a question. So I'll explore that spectrum during today's presentation, as well as open the hood, look a little bit underneath so you can get an idea how this works, what are some of the challenges and what we can do about them. And then I'll lead into a discussion where we more openly can discuss what is happening in technology and what does it mean for our lives and the society in general. So more specifically, I'll start talking about some approaches to search, a little bit more about that spectrum that I just sketched. And then I start to open the hood And underneath modern search experiences, as well as LLMs for that matter, are two techniques known as embeddings and vector search. It's really the foundation of modern AI. And I'll continue to talk about some of the challenges and hurdles that remain and that are the reason that you don't have this kind of experience everywhere yet. Which leads me to talk about, well, doing more than just queries and towards what Marv was showing, conversations with systems, which really goes back to, well, it reminds me of the Turing test of intelligence. It was, can you tell whether the system you're interacting with, is it a system or a human? And I think we've gotten a lot closer to that with ChatGPT, which is why everybody's been excited. So let me start off more maybe because you might appreciate here the story. So a year ago, I was visiting a good friend in Munich, and near Munich flows the Isar River. You might think it's somewhere in, well, if you didn't see some of these buildings, it could be near Alaska or in Alaska or something. But it's just well, 20 miles outside of Munich. So knowing that, we were in Munich and we were thinking, well, how do we get to the nearest bank on the Isar River? And we were expecting some, well, directions how to get to a place like this. This one is pretty close to Munich. You can still see the famous church with those onion-shaped tops and towers. But then what we got back is this. And even though, well, it's in German, well, I'll point out, you see, well, bank here, bank. So it showed us where financial banks are nearby. So that's an example where the search didn't get the meaning of bank and it broke down. And I bet you've had similar experiences. I don't know, I'll open it up here. If anybody wants to share a frustrating search experience they've had. Oh, then Ron would have to unmute you guys. So I don't know if somebody raises their hand.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I can't think of this specifics, but this happens, where there's a company I hear and it has a name, which is a simple name that is a common word. And then I want to search for it, and I put that word in, and the search engine can't get the idea that I'm looking for, a specific company, and rather than the general meaning of this word. That's one example.
Yeah, that's the issue of semantic search. Well, there's ambiguity in our language, and it's been a challenge with natural language processing all along.
Well,
Any other?
Yeah, I have another. I'm not sure whether this is pertinent enough, but I lived in Düsseldorf for a year, and I remember once traveling with a colleague who said, let's go to Cologne, and we wanted to see a cathedral. And we were traveling, and I was looking at street signs. I didn't see Cologne. I saw Keln. And I'm trying to understand, there's a semantic search, but it's a difference in the spelling in English and in German, right? Is that a semantic search?
Well, maybe that's what I call vocabulary mismatch, where you don't know the correct word to pull it up.
Yeah. Okay.
Good, great. Well, just to tee this up a little more, so you can see the stable site, right?
Yeah.
So this is an example of more keyword search. But we see that in many companies, when we look for something, I'll start typing, and then it matches against all the keywords that are in the domain of stables and shows all the HP products. If you do something else, like chair, it is a little smarter, so it attempts to match different types of chairs, so you can choose which one you're interested in. But then it breaks down if you do something like wires for printer. then it cannot find anything. And here it would need to get the meaning, I'm looking for wires, and none of the stables product matches that. So that's pretty typical for company search experiences these days still. But they are getting there to upgrade them, but there is some hurdles. So that's why I'll talk about that later. All right, well, so let me just go back over the spectrum of search experiences. And well, there is quite a few, but really we'll just have to sort of focus on both ends and the middle. So, well, you see, well, in the 70s, even 80s, well, some AI was being used. So that's 50 years ago. And there they would just match based on keywords, which is still mostly under the hood of something like stables. Well, there's a little bit more. There's a statistical technique that's pretty powerful to rate the relevance of words relative to what you're looking for. And it goes to essentially, if you want to rate a document and whether a single word is characteristic of that document. So let's say, well, you're looking for reasons for heart disease. And then, well, if you use words that describe different heart diseases like coronary artery problems or whatever it is, you'll see that word quite a few times in relevant documents. So the frequency of these heart-related conditions is not negligible in relevant documents. Whereas in all other documents that don't talk about heart disease at all, you're not going to find those conditions mentioned. And then, so a technique known as TF-IDF, so that's term frequency inverse documents frequency. So you compare the frequency of the term, the specific heart condition, relative to how often does it appear across the document you are looking at versus all other documents. So then for a document that talks about heart, this is going to be the quotient, the ratio is going to be a high number. Whereas if it's not relevant, it's going to be near 1. So that's a pretty powerful technique to rate relevance of documents in relation to specific topics. So that's at this end of the spectrum. Then in the middle, well, that's just less than 10 years ago, a technique known as vector search emerges. And that really overcame the limitations of all these previous approaches by capturing the meaning of what you're looking for. And then further out, well, at the right end of the spectrum, we have large language model. So that's the latest, well, what has been popularized by ChatGPT and what was under the hood of what Marv showed. So what are the issues? Well, we talked a little bit about that, of these traditional lexical search approaches. One is the semantic mismatch that I explained with this problem of bank. A vocabulary mismatch, if you're not familiar with the jargon, like, well, general English is fine, but now if you're troubleshooting a problem with your TV, you're not going to know the specific components necessarily inside a TV, or with your car. If you start to take the, well, I guess we do a lot with your car, so we know a bunch of the parts, carburetor, air filter, whatnot. But if you are not familiar with the domain, you'll use a term that doesn't match, so there's a vocabulary mismatch, and the term stands out, and your search technology is not going to pick it up. And then finally, there is the maintenance effort. So if you base your searches on keywords, the company has to keep configuring those keywords. For one, all the stables has to index all its products with what they are, the HB printer, and it's an inkjet versus versus a needles printer. Well, those are not used anymore, but you get the idea. And then as they add product, they need to keep adding those keywords. So there's a lot of maintenance. So now let's look at how is semantic search differently. So there's three key ideas. One is that, well, these embeddings that I'm going to talk about, it's a high dimensional representation of documents. They capture the meaning, and I'll tell you how that works, or I sketch it for you. And then the secret sauce is the way it represents it. It does it so that proximity in this high dimensional space corresponds to similarity in meaning. And then if you have accomplished that, search just boils down to finding nearest neighbors of what you're looking for in this high dimensional representation. And that's essentially how semantic search works. I'll go over this again, so I just wanted to outline the main components I'll be talking about more. So how did that, well, what are the key innovations that led to this? One is something called attention mechanism. And there is, well, a seminal paper by Google researchers that was published in 2017. And I'll sketch the main gist of that. And then, well, you can actually obtain and train these attention models with something known as a transformer network. So this is as technical as I'll get. I'm not going to show you how a transformer network looks like, but it's a special architecture of a deep neural network. And then the next important component is, since the late 2010s, these models are trained on orders of magnitude more data, essentially the whole internet. Probably most of you have heard that. And well, that's just, that catapulted the power of these models to a new level. Previously, it was tens of thousands of examples or 100,000s, and now we're talking about billions. And that makes these models see so many differences and so many different contexts. That's how they capture the meaning of language. Now, by the way, I want to keep this interactive. So, oh, let's see, there's new messages. Yeah, well, there's just some conversation going. So let me continue the train of thought. Maybe Ron, you can flag if there's something in the chat that I should address.
Okay. Yeah.
So key to be able to use something, billions of words, the whole internet, is that you don't have to process this data. You don't have to annotate it. So let me explain that concept of AI. So all AI approaches are essentially learning from data, and you need to have the data. And for most tasks, there is an important exceptions. You need to know what is the category that you want to classify it, or what is the correct response of your semantic search. Or if you're doing image search, what is shown in that image. So you need to have that label to train the AI model. But labeling data is very labor intensive. So up until this innovative idea of a masked approach, labeling data was a big limitations of how much you could do with AI models. And that hurdle was lowered in the late 2010s. And essentially for language, it's simple. You sort of leave out a word and then let the AI guess what the word is. So if you look at this simple example, the fox runs after, well, it could be a rabbit, it could be a squirrel. Most likely it's not a horse, and much less a car. So, well, this kind of stupid example shows it can be pretty powerful. Well, it then starts to learn what makes sense in the context. And you don't need to manually label language with that. You can just leave out each word one at a time and then have your AI model guess or rank what are the best fits for that model. And that's essentially also what ChatGPT does. Well, if you type in your query, you start to see these words being printed out, but it constructs them sequentially. And at each step, ChatGPT finds the best guess for the next word. And that's how that also operates essentially.
Let me ask
Now,
you a question. Let
to
me ask you a
train
question.
on so much data with these complex deep neural networks with many layers and millions or nowadays billions of parameters, that's computationally very intensive. So you need GPUs to do that. And they became available in the mid-2010s. So that's another key innovation or improvement that kicked off this step improvement in what AI can do that we have experienced. Let me see, is there any high-level comment or question on this that I should address before
Yeah,
I go on?
I don't know if this is high level,
I
but
don't
I'm
hear you,
curious.
Ron.
Why is this called a masked approach? I mean, what is the reason it's called a masked approach? It sounds like a guess, right? If the fox runs after a
I
hen,
hear
the
it
fox runs
wrong.
after a car. No, that's not right. But why is it called a masked approach?
I don't think he can hear you, Ron.
Oh, I don't understand that.
Well, he said in the beginning that he had a problem and he needed to fix his settings, but I guess he didn't manage to do it.
Well, I thought I did, but then it went off. Well, I'll switch to I'll hear it on the headset. So,
Oh, okay. Can you
well,
hear
now
me?
I hear you again. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was just curious about the use of the word masked approach. Why is it called masked? I mean, it seems more like a guess, right? The fox runs after a hen, the fox runs after a rabbit, but the fox wouldn't run after a car. But why is this called a masked approach?
Well, you run a mask over the sentence and you mask out one word at a time.
Oh, I see.
That's the mask. Yes.
Ah, I see. Okay, now I get it. Okay.
So I have a question. I'm not sure I understand exactly where this is going and how it's being used, but I think you made the comment that you know, give something up to a certain point and then you put a blank and then it figures out what's the next, the most logical, probable
Yeah.
word to go there. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, you just iterate this and it, that gets that word and then it gets the next word and the next word and the next word. I mean, can you just start it with a part of a sentence and then it can write a whole essay but just by one sequential word at a time?
Yeah, well, you give it a start point, start of sentence, but then, well, you limit how long it goes. So there's settings in these large language models that suggest, well, keep your response near 50 words versus 200 words.
Well,
So
I guess also you have to give it a context or a subject that it's writing about. No, I mean, I guess that's what
well,
you do when you interact with a large language model. You sort of like tell it the general kind of things you're looking at for. No.
yeah, but I was referring to, well, just the queries we do with ChatGPT.
Okay.
So it responds to the query, which in a way is a search problem. And it becomes a dialogue if you then continue to respond to how, well, so you have a query, ChatGPT responds, and then you continue. That's what makes it conversational. But back to your original question, so there is this parameter, but then if stopping, if ending the answer is the most likely next step, then ChatGPT will stop. So that's the other important way how it knows to stop.
We have a
Oh,
couple of other
If I
hands
could,
up. We have a
oh,
couple of other hands up. We'll take them. I want to make sure you have time to get through your presentation. But while we have the hands, let's take them. Walter, you're first.
Yeah, I'm wondering why GPUs are used instead of CPUs. What is it about graphic processors that are more efficient in the LLM, large language model?
Yes, well, neural networks, there is lots of matrices involved, weights, and we'll see that with the next slide. So, and GPUs are much more efficient at processing matrices, doing matrix algebra.
Oh, okay.
Tom?
Yeah, just to be clear, so when you're filling in that blank, the fox runs after A, you've gone out to the entire web and looked at those words and then found the most likely word that comes next. Is that correct?
No, think about it. Well, the semantic model is going to be trained on everything in the web. And in some documents, the fox runs after a rabbit. In others, it sees it runs after a cat. And it's never going to see runs after a car. So after you're done with the training, then the model has an idea how likely is rabbit versus cat versus car.
Okay. All right.
Albert?
Yeah. So basically, I'm following up on Tom's question and your response, which is basically is doing statistics. What is the probability of having a fox after rabbit? Is that basically what it is? And if it is, then where does the understanding of the sentence come in, if at all?
Yeah, well, there is at least some. Well, AI has its roots in statistics, and a lot of it are kind of counting statistical approaches. But then it's also optimization. So the other kind of component that comes in here, you're sort of optimizing this relative to a task. Well, it can be just predict the next word, but it can be also, well, find the most relevant document relative to a query. So then the optimization criterion is more complex. But then where the meaning comes in, well, that's a little bit secret sauce magic, but well, maybe I'll get back to that once I explain these embeddings, how they capture meaning. But I already said proximity in this high dimensional space, which is just numeric, and then there you're still thinking statistically. The way this was set up and trained, the proximity numerically corresponds to proximity in meaning. So that's how the meaning comes in.
All right. Let's go to Ryan and then Marvin, and we'll continue with your presentation. All right. Ryan, you're up.
Hi, so I've got two questions here. The first one is, are there certain texts it finds more difficult to figure out what comes next in? So for example, fictional or like something to do with law or something like that?
Yes. So it'll be the latter. So it will have difficulty with specialized domains where on the general internet there is not as much, it's underrepresented. And then, well, if you're a lawyer and want to use ChatGPT, you'll be disappointed in many cases because it doesn't know your lingo, it doesn't know all the cases you're referring to. And well, yeah, you fast forward. That's one of the challenges of these approaches that I'll talk about.
Okay, and so thank you. And the second question is, how does it deal? I'm assuming you've only used certain languages with it, but how does it deal with a language like, I'm not sure the name of it, but I know certain Chinese written languages, the characters can have multiple or like extended meanings associated with it. So if it's trying to guess what comes next with like Mandarin, where one character can have like a whole sentence worth of meaning associated with it, is it able to figure out what character comes next in something like that?
Well, I haven't dealt with that specifically. My guess is, well, it comes in with the optimization criterion. So then if you still rank which document in Chinese is most relevant, it'll pick the one where well, the most relevant of these multiple meanings is correct. And it'll downgrade the other ones. So the training will still learn to distinguish that.
Thank you.
Marv?
So I just want to make a couple of quick points. One is that this is really a very simple example and necessary example. This is a little bit like what GPT-1 did, in that you're looking at one word at a time, sometimes one letter at a time, and predicting it, which can go off the rails. The way I think about it is at the base level, computers just ons and offs, just ones and zeros. And that seems simplistic, but when you start multiplying that by billions, you start getting a complexity that is much richer. And this is the simple version of semantic processing and with a transformer, but think of it as the ones and zeros, the bits and bytes, and then how rich it becomes. An example of that is the more current versions do not just predict one word. They actually take the whole chunk, and it can be like an article you upload or a book, and can take it's the working area, and work on the whole chunk at one time. And there is an alchemy in that it appears to then be able to extract meaning, because the relationship of the words in big chunks start emulating in a way the way we think, which is actually my third point. There's an ongoing argument, and this is what Hinton fought for years from '72 when he took on neural networking heavily, which is the argument is, what is the brain being emulated by the computer, or does the brain actually function like a computer? In other words, are we basically correlation engines ourselves, statistical correlation engines? I'm not going to venture an opinion on it, but if you suspend that for a moment and just say it's possible that this is starting to work the way the brain works, and just look at the results, that's not too far off. And the last thing I must make is that obviously this type of thing, the fox runs after a blank, could lead to what we call hallucinations. Those of you who are using more advanced models will notice that over the last 22 months, literally this week, since ChatGPT came out, hallucinations are way down. There are lots of techniques and technologies that are being applied, which are originally called RLHF, which is reinforcement learning by human factors. That's sort of what I call good dog, bad dog. Yes, that's the right answer. Do more of that. Don't do that. And by the way, don't talk about sex. So we train it afterwards. RL, without the human factor aspect, is becoming more common within the systems themselves. So they self-correct through a number of methods like RAG that make that prediction before it's presented to us much more likely to be accurate.
Yeah, thank you, Marv. Yeah, that was all a good additional detail, and yeah, I'll let that stand mostly, but I'll take your comment. It's not just a single word, because to explain how attention works, we need to look at more than one word, but sentences. So let me get into that. So one of the key secret sources is this attention mechanism, and the paper that popularized or introduced that notion is titled "Attention is All You Need." And I'm at, that's one of the key ingredients that helps capture the meaning, aside from how you train this thing. But essentially, what you do is capture relationship between words. And AI did that even in the old days with, graphs and showing relationships. So if you look at the sentences, and here it's just shown for the word it, what is it most strongly related to? Well, it refers back to the animal. So there is a strong relationship. It refers a little bit to cross, because it crossed, and it street, and then it goes into because. It describes a little bit more about it. So that's why, and then how do you represent these relationship in a computer? Well, it's weights, and it's weights in a matrix. You have one set of words and the other set of words. Now, one beauty or ingenuity is you can start training this by having the same sentence on both sides and explore how are words within a sentence related. And well, just imagine, well, for cross, what would be the high weights? Well, again, the animal crossed, and well, the street, and so forth. You can see where this goes. But then as a next step, you can do this with different sentences to describe the relationships between a query and a possible answer, a document. So that's really one of the key innovations that helped fuel the modern AI, and Google introduced that. Now, kind of continuing in that, once you train this thing, it's going to be a very high dimensional space, and that's referred to as an embedding space. It embeds the meaning in this high dimensional space. And the way it works out is, well, words that are related are going to be close to each other in this high dimensional space. So, well, with a fox, the cat and this, well, the cat is going to be over here, but squirrel and rabbit are closer, and car is over here. And then, well, back to this example here, well, you explore sets of fruits, but then there's companies that are fruits, so they'll be somewhat close, but a little farther away. So once you have this space, this representation, then searching for similar items becomes searching for nearest neighbors in this high dimensional space. And that's what vector search does. And it just, well, this is, of course, there's computational challenges. So a lot of vector search is how you do this efficiently. Okay. I'll move a little faster, but well, it's good that we spend a lot of time on this, since that was one of the main things, understanding how this works, or one of the things I hope to convey in today's talk. So where's this used? Well, we talked about Staples, so that's e-commerce to find things, but also if you see, not in Staples, but Amazon, it shows you other people looked at these items. Well, if you have a book, here are related books, or if you look for a bracelet, other bracelets. And then in customer service, well, if we can empowered to find the answers to our questions ourselves, we don't have to wait for an agent, which always takes multiple minutes. So that helps us and helps the company. Or semantic search is used also to empower agents to find among their job aids what's the right answer to the question I was posed. And then, well, just to sketch a third, well, with media, well, there's all these libraries. Well, this is a picture still from Blockbuster, but well, in Netflix, to find a movie, it uses semantic search underneath, and to make recommendations, maybe you should watch this movie, might interest you. It also uses that same approach. So now I'm getting into some of the challenges, and thanks to Ryan for it served up this first problem. So if you use these standard models, they are great on general English, but they break down on specialized domains like, well, law, or if you were to look for specific Staples offerings with ChatGPT, it's not gonna know that. So then how you overcome that is you need to build a domain adapted model. So then you cannot use off the shelf what's out there. This requires a team with AI skills. So I'm getting into that next. That's one of the hurdles to adoption, that this adaptation to domains is difficult. This just sketches the process. For one, you cannot use the masked approach to get training data. You have to actually annotate data, like with customer service inquiries let's stick with Staples. It's going to have to go through what questions were asked and what is the right answer. It's not going to find that in the general internet, and that's very laborious. And then you need to train this adapted model. So that requires AI skills and GPUs. And then you need to generate the embeddings and integrate that in your system. You cannot use it off the shelf. So this is going to take weeks to months instead of off the shelf. Now let's move to LLMs sort of as the second big thing to talk about what is different with LLMs. So, well, I already teed that up with my example. Well, here we could go into that, but maybe in the interest of time, I'll just walk through my example from the beginning. Well, can you recommend a bank? And then, well, ChatGPT also comes back. Well, in this case, didn't get that subtlety. So then the main thing what LLMs do on top of just the semantic search is it's a back and forth. So you can respond. And then, well, LLMs, they take this whole conversation into consideration before they produce the next answer. So that really makes this conversational. And that's one of the main things LLMs add. The second thing, big step forward is, well, with Gen AI, it's not just text, but they handle other types of interaction. Well, find images or produce images with image generation, and so forth. So, what are some of the problems of LLMs? Well, Marv already mentioned hallucinations. So, well, they see all this data on the internet, and then you ask them a question, and then something may numerically be close, but it's totally off. It's not the answer. So that's what's an hallucination. And well, we have all experienced that. Second is they are very costly. Well, the pricing model is often that you get charged by token that you feed into the LLM, and those are tiny fractions of a cent. But well, if you feed in 10,000 tokens and you do this 100,000 times a day, like large companies do, then it quickly adds up. And then finally, there is, well, ethical concerns for, well, data privacy, but also guardrails that Marv alluded to when to prevent these LLMs from giving an inappropriate answer. So Marv mentioned a technique how to overcome that called RAG. Well, and I'll explain very briefly what that is, since well, my talk here goes one level into under the hood. So here you have standard semantic search. You have your data. You convert that into embeddings, and then a query that's also converted to embeddings, and then a vector search is going to do the semantic search for you. Now, what does LLM and RAG add? It uses an LLM to process the answer from semantic search. So semantic search is going to give you a list of documents that are relevant. And then the LLM can pull out exactly the piece that's most relevant to your answer. And it can take in the context or the previous queries that you have given and the answers that the LLM provided. It takes all that into consideration to produce a new answer to a query. And that is a lot more powerful than just a single query. And well, so that's known as RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Well, retrieval of documents augmented with generation. Of course, you're not going to remember that. That's okay, but I just wanted to make that connection. Okay, well, that leads me to the point where we can open up for more discussion. So you have learned what is under the hood, how semantic is captured with these modern AI models. And we've talked just a little bit about what LLM and Gen AI add. Now, well, so what does it open up? Well, I have here a video that shows how with Gen AI, you can have actual assistants that help you. I don't know, maybe I'll just play this and it can give some inspiration for the discussion. Can you all hear this? Give a thumbs down if there's a problem.
I can't hear it.
Oh, wait a minute. This is not what I meant to show. Okay, well, I thought at least there would be.
Yeah, with no audio.
It does have closed captions.
All right, well, okay, maybe. Here it is.
Once again, there is no audio. The captions work. Okay.
Yeah.
So, well,
Fine.
just to point out a couple things. You laugh, well, you get the point, most of it, but well, the Gen AI experience could pull in an image of what you're troubleshooting. So that's the multimodal aspect. Well, and it made specific suggestion what to do instead of presenting you with a list of options, and then you have to find the right one. So yeah, let's open this up for more discussion.
I'm glad I'm old.
Go ahead, Pete.
I was just going to say,
glad I'm old. I have to put up with this stuff too much.
Well, let me ask a question. And I was a researcher while I was at MIT, and I had an experience with a search for some information that I thought would be useful. And this was shortly after November of 2022 when ChatGPT appeared, and I got a whole set of fictitious references to literature that just didn't exist. And I know there's a famous law case, sort of a similar issue, where an attorney had filed a brief to the court and included reference to citations of law that also were fictitious, didn't exist. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, but that's a hallucination. And but there's so much stuff out there, then, well, something is going to sound related to your query. It's going to pull up what sounds the most. And well, if you query for something very specific and that wasn't included, this model has never seen that, it's not going to find the right answer. It's going to pick the next best one, which may be totally wrong. The other reason you see this is when it goes out to the internet, and there's these days a lot of misinformation and, well, chats going on Reddit where people comment on stuff. Well, that's where the sort of some of the derogatory language comes from. But the first, well, there is wrong information out there, and that gets trained into the model just like the correct stuff. So that, along with this proximity, that's something incorrect. If the model never has seen what is correct or hasn't seen enough of that, it's gonna be close in that embedding space.
Yeah, but I mean the question, and I just see a chat from Tony. The question I have is how would a generative AI invent answers to my question that are untruthful. I mean, how do you prevent that? What is the way that I could have prevented, or fortunately I didn't file a report with those references, but how could I have monitored this to
How does
get,
it invent citations that don't exist?
yeah.
Yeah, there are really two answers to that.
Yeah.
Actually, the two questions, I should say. One question is what you just asked: how does it invent a citation that didn't exist? But
Yeah.
the other one is how do you deal with that?
Right.
And the answer to the first one is it doesn't have inherently a knowledge of truth or not truth. It is doing some predictive work, and so it could be, as was mentioned, that there's bad data, and that's much more common than people think. And there might have been somewhere along the way some idea that somebody had on a blog post about a fictitious example they used, and that got incorporated in the LLM.
Yeah.
It's not copied, all right? It's just statistical associations, and so if the system is unchecked, it can produce virtually anything, and that's one example of what it can produce. The other question is how can we overcome that? And that is happening. I'm in almost a show of hands, but my bet is that you've seen a lot fewer hallucinations over the last few months than existed before, because that is not just a known problem that is of concern in the AI world, but it's one that's gotten a lot of attention, and there are techniques like RAG. What RAG does effectively, and it sort of moves towards the question of agency, is it's an internal dialogue where it, before the transformer, the decoder puts out an answer, it starts an internal dialogue to see whether or not that answer is correct in two ways. One is it current, and that's why it's retrieval augmented, because it goes out to some data source that may be more current than when the database or when the LLM was trained, to make sure that the information is giving us current. It's not reporting on last year's and baseball playoffs. It's reporting on what's going to happen this year. It checks itself. But there is a dialogue going on internally, and that dialogue has to hit some statistical metrics before it says, good enough, I'll give that information back to the person who asked the prompt. And that's there are multiple techniques being used to do that, but the number of those type of hallucinations are going down. I know people focus on that, and the trustworthiness of the data is of the information you get is extremely important, but that is not going to be as common an experience. And I'm talking about over the next couple of months. I'm not talking years. This is happening very quickly. So I wouldn't fixate on hallucinations. Just be aware of the fact that they are some inherent aspects. But then again, that's where the argument goes back to how different are they from how the human brain functions. We all do that too.
Yeah. Bernhard, do you want to add to that? We have some hands, but I do want to make sure you have a chance to respond.
No, that was very good. Just in the interest of keeping going, let's go to some of the other questions.
Okay. Michael, you're up. Oh, well, Michael's up.
Yep. So, a Google employee, as I understand it, was recently terminated for saying that AI had gone sentient. And another story I heard was that researchers had two computers, both with AI, and during the research, both computers started communicating with each other in a language that they created between each other that the humans couldn't understand, so they pulled the plug. Is this true? And if it is, I'm glad I'm old too.
Well, I haven't heard that story, but well, there is an ongoing discussion. Well, where does this lead to? And some have concerns that AI could start to, well, rule over humans. If AI does all the decisions, well, we get reduced in what we do. But well, going back, so back to feelings, well, I'm a strong believer AI is not going to get there. That's something uniquely human. But well, some people will go in that direction, and well, even if it will be, even if it were to become technologically possible, I think that's where the guardrails need to come in and put boundaries around that.
It's sort of interesting to think. You mentioned people getting fired, Michael, and it is sort of interesting to me the number of people in this area of technology who seem to lose their jobs for saying things. And I'm thinking of, the guy, Sam Altman from OpenAI. He was fired, then rehired. There's a woman named Timnit Gebru from Google who was fired, and she's founded her own enterprise afterwards, all for saying things that the corporate management didn't care much about. That seems to be I don't think I've seen the frequency in other industries that I've seen in terms of generative AI. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it just seems to me there may be some corporate boardroom tension that is fueling some of this. But we'll come to that. Let's go to hands in turn. Tom, you're up.
Yeah, I have a question about training, and training, and specifically comparison training for the language models and the image models. Are the language models unsupervised training and the images supervised? So does somebody have to, for example, does somebody have to identify in an image what a cat is? But on the language models, you don't have to do that. Is that correct or not correct?
Yeah, well, most things get seeded with supervised learning, where you have the labels. Here we get into machine learning lingo, but I hope most understand that intuitively. So yeah, with the image AI, that got a lot better once there were larger databases of labeled images available. But it's been lagging language a little bit because that's harder. Now, once you have a pretty good model, you can use the model to label new data, and it's going to be accurate 95% of the time. And then, well, then it becomes sort of a bootstrapping process, and you can train with this AI labeled data and get better. You see more variance. Sometimes it's wrong, but if it's wrong few enough times, you win. So that's the way how you go out, extend the boundaries and do better. And something like, yeah, well, Marv mentioned this RLHF, human feedback. So that's how they address preventing Gen AI to do inappropriate things. Then they have humans rate Gen AI responses, and if they are bad, well then they build a model that rates the response for you, and that's what they use to put a guardrail around the LLMs, or to reduce inappropriate responses as well as hallucinations. All right, who's next?
Yeah, Albie.
I just want to point out, Ron, that the other Ron.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Albie should go ahead, but Ron, the other Ron is using his physical hand. Putting his hand up.
All right.
Go ahead, Albie.
I use the electronic one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, let's see.
The question I have is along sort of, I don't go with what Ron said before, and that is, how do you handle things like conspiracy theories that are out there? And there's a question, of course, among the people of what is true and what isn't true. Now, some of them are outlandish, and it'll be interesting to know how the model filters those out. Some of them get to be blurry. One that comes to mind is the origin of the COVID virus. At the beginning, there was widespread, what was it, 200 scientists signed a letter that it couldn't have originated in a Chinese lab. It had to be a wet market. Over time, that's evolved to, I think now, most people think it probably was in the lab and not in the wet market. But in general, I mean, conspiracy theories are actually influencing society in terms of in terms of the what is believed and what isn't. Another example would be the alleged election fraud of 2020. How does the AI model differentiate between what's real and what isn't?
Well, I don't know for sure, but it's the same what I described. You can model that behavior. You can model whether content is a conspiracy theory. Build a model of that, and then these days, as content platforms are more careful, I bet they are using models to prevent this content to be posted. Though they are still interested in their business motivation is the more people on the platform, the better. And conspiracy theories have brought a lot of traffic to their platforms. So that's how this all got started. Marv, if you know more, feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, I think we have to distinguish between what AI does and what humans do. So the conspiracy theories, AI is sort of neutral in and of itself. It's either, it predicts. We modify that neutrality through a number of ways. One, what do we prompt it to do? On the one hand, somebody wants it to tell a story, a sex story. I'm just picking that out because it's a guardrail everybody uses. And most of those systems won't do that because they've been told don't to. We've modified its output. But there are systems out there, like I think Replicate or whatever, that simply they don't put those guardrails on it. So it becomes a human choice to a certain degree. But over time, it becomes a system choice. Now, it's really important to understand one very important point about the information these things work with. They work with three different types of information. Initially, and this goes back to an old joke in the mid 90s when the internet was just getting started, that you would click on a site and that it didn't really happen, I don't think. The sign would come up saying you've come to the end of the internet. These large data centers, and I don't think people have an idea how big they are. I've been in some of them. They're the size of like 20 football fields. That's not an exaggeration, filled with nothing but servers. That's why NVIDIA is making so much money. And everybody else. There's right now, it's not a rumor. Sam Altman talked about it to a certain degree in the White House this week, that wants to raise a massive fund. The number that I've heard is $7 trillion just to build data centers. And that one estimate is that I just saw yesterday that right now in the United States, data centers for every purpose, we use them all the time, use about 3% of our energy output. And then by 2030, that's going to be between 8 and 10%, which is why Microsoft just paid to have 3 Mile Island turned back on. So these data centers have absorbed everything the internet has. So that's one source of information. And a lot of that's bad data. Second, so how do you filter that out? It's a big question. And that leads to, hallucinations, but also leads to conspiracy theories because the system doesn't know inherently which is right and which is wrong. Second type of data is proprietary data. One question that comes up a lot is why is Meta, Facebook, making their LLM, which is, by the way, it's called Llama, open source, and anybody can use it without any charge and can modify it any way they want. They're actually doing it for competitive reasons, and it's brilliant because they're basically saying whoever doesn't have proprietary data they can add in. I'll come to that in 1 second. I won't be too lengthy. That those people are all working off the same data that they scraped from the internet. And if we give it away, those people don't have a business model. Meta, by one estimate, owns somewhere between a third and almost a half of all the information that's ever been put on the internet, through Facebook posts, through Instagram, through WhatsApp, and they're going to use the system to train on that. In fact, Musk at XAI has directly said he's only training it on their proprietary Twitter data, Twitter feeds. Now, you know how accurate those are. And so the ability to have private data that you add back in that nobody knows anything about is real. That's happening right now. And the third is also happening. And a lot of people are concerned this is going to be the dominant type of data, which is data generated by AI itself that goes through some sort of metric, which nobody knows what it is, and that it gets reincorporated as data that's used in the future. So the chain of trust becomes a big issue. And to be totally honest, there isn't any good answer to it. It's actually questions that are just being raised. And the last screen that Bernhard put up, I don't think we got into, which is the societal effects of this. I think that's the real issue we have to look at.
Which sounds like a great topic for the next session where we have a panel. But let me comment on one thing, and then I'll pass back to you, Ron. What Marv said about proprietary data. That's actually one key reason why RAG is interesting to companies, because RAG lets them empowers them that you can search just their information, which is appropriate if people want to find out about you, and it's safe. If it does, then the answer never hallucinates. It's constrained to your proprietary data that you know is correct, and that's the main way how we deal with or companies deal with hallucinations.
Yeah.
Can I make one last comment on that and give you an example? Some of you might have noticed that IBM stock has taken off recently. It's been moribund for decades. And that's because they actually have an interesting solution for companies. So proprietary data is, I gave an example of Facebook and X, where we can be very concerned about that. But let me give you another example, which is less concerning. Let's say Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has a lot of proprietary data, their distribution channels. So what specific chemicals affect people in different parts of the country. I mean, it's amazing what they have. That's proprietary data they want to use, but they don't want to create what I consider to be an LLM, or the foundational models out there from like Google and OpenAI and Microsoft and increasingly large number of them. They don't want to create these massive LLMs. I consider them encyclopedias. So they want to interact. They want to take their proprietary data and have it hook in to the larger system so that they can use their proprietary data, analyze that against the larger data, and then use the chat capabilities to do marketing materials, the customer support. They don't build the LLMs. They build what people call SLMs, small language models, to interact. And IBM's win is when they bought Red Hat, they built sort of the hybrid cloud, which created that basic environment, which says, here's applications like Salesforce or whatever that everybody uses, and here's our proprietary data. How do we get them to work together? And that's what IBM is doing, and is increasing. Microsoft is doing it too with Azure, and Google starting to do it. They're providing customers the ability to take that proprietary data, combine it, or use it along with the external data, and that's a pretty big deal. I mean, I'll give you one quick example of it and why there's a big risk specifically to customer relationship management. Salesforce has 150,000 organizations who use their software. They handle 43% of all customer contacts in the world. So anytime you call about, product, or you call about, you know, your service from your electric company, or you're looking for technical support. It all goes through the Salesforce systems. They announced the Einstein agent about a month and a half ago, and the Einstein agent, by combining the proprietary data of the company with the larger LLMs, will supposedly take care of 70% of all customer contact in the world out of those 43%. So a very large percentage of customer contact will be taken over by that combination of proprietary data and the large language models. And that has significant economic impact. For a lot of people, having that job is the first step, on the first rung on the ladder. What happens if the rung's not there? Which is why I point out the societal impact is a big deal.
Thanks, Mark. That really does put perspective on the magnitude of what we're dealing with, and I think that's something we do want to talk about, especially next time when we meet in a general conversation. I want to turn to Albert, but first to Ron Smith. I know I've seen Ron hasn't got his hand up, but I know he's been trying to get my attention. Before I do that, I just want to say one thing about the Microsoft 3 Mile Island issue. Microsoft is concerned because of the huge demand, electric demand represented by their data centers. They do want to restart 3 Mile Island for their exclusive use. And my comment is, and this is where my nuclear engineering nerves get really frayed. My comment is that the 3 Mile Island was designed to operate for 40 years with very good materials of construction. They and other nuclear plants have been, many of them have been relicensed for another 20 years. But they were never intended to be decommissioned and then recommissioned. And so the question is, how were they managed during that period when they were decommissioned before, if they're going to be recovered, restarted, there's got to be a hell of a lot of inquiry to make sure the materials of construction are still stable. That is not a slam dunk in my judgment. And so I think there's a great deal of risk in the concept of taking decommissioned nuclear power plants and recommissioning them without doing an awful lot of homework. And I'm not quite sure whether or not, I don't know exactly how the NRC and Microsoft are interacting, but if they're going to do this, there better be a lot of attention paid, because one more incident like the 3 Mile Island incident will just totally shut down nuclear power. I'm convinced of that. One more incident like that. It's just so fragile. So anyway, that's my point of view, and I'm sticking to it. Ron, let's go to Toronto.
Okay, live from Toronto. Well, you and I have been joking about this 3 Mile Island thing being the search for an off switch for AI for some time.
Right.
Basically, is it a way also to be able to tell if the companies are getting nervous about where things are going? If more line up behind the idea of repurposing decommissioned nukes or bringing new ones online, or abrogating the power from a consumer to their needs, it gets interesting. And I think it's an indicator of what we may be seeing, even though no one's saying it. First one, and more important, though, goes to what Bernhard was saying about customer service. I think we have a major trust issue brewing with AI as far as whether people believe the results or not. I guess a show of hands would be good to be able to say who would trust the answers you're getting right now if you are using an AI. Do we see any hands, Ron? Because you can see everybody.
Well, no, seriously, I know it can be useful. I've seen it. I know it can be, but I also don't have full trust in it. That's my problem. I know if I'm asking it to provide me with information where I have some personal intelligence on the subject, and I can be convinced it's useful, but I worry about the other extreme, and that is where I mentioned the law briefs that were filed that were fictitious, and also my own search for references that were fictitious. That's the kind of trust issue from my perspective.
Well, and that's an excellent point, because I think one of the dangers we face in the longer term is if people get the idea that somehow they can't trust this and they're going to have to work hard at fact checking every information piece they're getting, that it's going to stall progress at best, and it could damage what might come next heavily if we're not careful. Now, to Mara's point about acceleration of overall intelligence, if you want to use that as a term, we're seeing in Strawberry, I've been using it conversationally, is a qualitative difference between that and any previous model. We've been working with 9 different AIs over time, and this is a step up for sure. So where that goes, who knows? But going back to Bernhard's part about customer service, Toyota rolled out their chatbot for service. So you call up for a service call, you get a chatbot, it tries to connect you with what you need. I am right now 0 for 3 in terms of doing that. I've had to go to a human every time to get the actual thing done, and it's taken a hell of a lot longer than it would have taken if I'd just been able to go direct.
Yeah, well, I'll have 2 comments to that directly. That problem has been with us for more than 20 years. 20 years ago, there were these touch tone systems that disabled 0 and then pushed you into hearing your balance or whatever it be, even though you knew I need to speak to an agent, and you wasted another minute or so. And nowadays, we see the same problem still with these virtual assistants or chatbots. Now well, I raised my hands. I would trust, or I trust the AI answer, knowing that it's more accurate compared to humans. Or if it's, I think that's at least my assumption. And otherwise, it's the AI model shouldn't have been deployed if it doesn't exceed human performance. But human agents make mistakes too. We probably all have experienced that where we got the completely wrong answer.
The stuff out, Bernhard? Are they rolling the stuff out too fast in terms of the overall health of what could become something major? That's the question. What are your thoughts?
Well, last year there was this hype, and people many tinkered with stuff and put it out there. I think we're sort of in the throe of, or we are reaching the throe of disillusionment in Gartner lingo with Gen AI, that companies are more careful and weigh what benefits does it give me, what's the cost, and what are the downsides. Am I prepared to control the downsides and risks?
But isn't this a race? This is a gold rush that people seem to be running to, even though, as Marv says, there's no real money in this as of yet, other than investment. There's certainly nothing coming out to any degree. The problem they've got is if you lose the trust of the public in using the tool, people are just not going to do it. And that could either slow or vastly change the whole landscape of possibility in regards to AI, correct?
Ron, I would challenge that. In that, I think you're giving people way too much credit for being both judgmental and having control. So as an example, there's a company called Klarna in Europe. They are the back end for every credit card company and bank in the world who offers buy now, pay later plans. They're very significant. They have 1,400 customer support people. Oh, I'm sorry, 700. They laid off 700 of them. Now, their customers are individuals, but it's also major banks like Citicorp. And they found over 6 months of testing that not only did it replace 700 of their lower rung customer support people, because of both the immediacy and the 24/7 availability, and by the way, the accuracy and the ability to communicate without an accent. I hate to point that out, but it's a problem in customer support. That they've laid off half of their customer support people, half of their marketing people, and they're doing fine. They're about to go public in the U.S. and they're making money hand over fist. So companies, yes, are very cautious. These issues we're talking about are real, but they're finding ways around them, and they're finding the results are not as bad as we might think they might be.
And Marv, Strawberry could be a big step up for
Strawberry
exactly that reason, right?
And for those of you who don't know what Strawberry is, it was only been available for 2 weeks. It was the reason Sam Altman was fired. Ilya Sutskever, who is the brain bucket at Google, and then recruited by Musk and Altman and Thiel at the beginning of OpenAI to be the he's the guy who created GPT. He went to the board. He was a board member of a nonprofit. And by the way, this week OpenAI it's leaked that they're going to convert from a nonprofit to a for-profit. And they're raising money at $150 billion valuation. So very real. Ilya Sutskever went to the board a year ago, right about now, and told them about something called Project Q Star. Project Q Star Strawberry. Its actual name, if you go and use the product, and for those of you paying, you can use Strawberry right now. It's a drop-down menu. It's called O1. And the reason they call it O1 is they're saying this is a whole new category. It reasons. They're not the only ones doing it. There's Sakana AI, which is the AI scientist, Japanese company that worked with Oxford that has an agentry-based scientist that can generate its own proposed problem and tests and theories. So we're moving very rapidly. And so the trust factor, I'm concerned that we give ourselves too much credit. We choose not to use it. We're not using it. It's affecting whether our credit rating, it's behind the scenes stuff as opposed to in front. But even the front, you cannot do a Google search now without there being a summary on top that's AI generated. Yeah. It's going to be so embedded in 2025 in everything we do, from our dishwashers to you name it, that our choice in the matter probably goes away. The question is, how do we adapt to it? Not do we hit an off button.
We're running close to the end of we're over our period, but let me turn to Albert, who will have the last word today, and then we'll wrap it up. Albert, go ahead.
Okay, last word, not very profound, but what I gathered is there was first search for proximity of words, and then there was connecting document or files. What makes it reasoning? What's the next step that claims that it does reasoning? Can you tell me that in a simple term?
I think, maybe Marv can elaborate, but it's how you train it. And then in training, you give the model harder tasks. So instead of just finding the best, most relevant answer, you train it to give you a relevant set of steps how to troubleshoot that problem we saw in the video. Or you are looking for, the sequence of thoughts that lead you to an argument. And then in the model training, it optimizes towards doing that well. And that's how these large language models have now added a whole lot of different abilities that go way beyond just having a little dialogue.
I think the best example of that was AlphaGo, which was almost a decade ago. The way in which AlphaGo beat the world champion Go player was it never ever was given, unlike DeepMind, which was the chess game that beat the chess from IBM in 1996 that beat Kasparov, it never was given a history of human Go games. What it was given was the goal. And it iterated many different paths to the goal and statistically picked out the most likely. And one of them happened to be a strategy no human was known to ever use before. And it picked that out. So it iterated creativity. That's what's happening. As I said, if you walk into a data center, I mean, think about something that's going to use 8 to 10% of the power of the United States. These things are massive. They're producing, Bernhard before said, we're talking about billions of parameters. Actually, the estimate is GPT-4 has 4 trillion parameters. Now, they didn't publish it. They did publish it for GPT-3, which was I'm over
In the
300 billion.
hundreds billion, yeah.
It was over 300 billion, I think, for GPT-3, but they didn't publish it for GPT-4, but the estimate is between 2 and 4 trillion. That's all being queried at exactly the same time. Every time you make a query, all those, quote, neurons are being queried. Massive amounts of computing, massive amounts of electricity and other resources. Water is a big one. These are all water-cooled systems. So that's why I think that the issues are not to be focused because they're very broad. And we need to understand the breadth of them. But these systems, because of how much can happen so quickly and how much information it can pull in at once, I have my doubts they're controllable.
Yeah.
And
sounds good. Thanks for that. Now, Bernhard referred to a video that showed the steps in the solution, but we couldn't hear it. Is there a way to get us that video?
Yeah, it's public. I can give the link to Ron, and he can include it in the next mailing.
Well,
Thank you.
let me just say that, you know, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks, and it's going to be an open conversation on all of this. And you know, Bernhard and Ron and Marv will be joining us. So I'd like everybody to come with thoughts on what your feelings are. For my own part, my sense of this is that there's an important question. The question is how far is too far? I mean, we're talking about machines now that apparently can reason. We're talking about machines that may have emotion and feelings. But I'll tell you, as a person, nothing could replace the feeling I had, for example, when I saw my first grandchild stand up at about 9 months old and walk. The emotion I felt, I can't imagine any machining reproducing. I just can't. And so, you know, maybe the question is how far is too far? And these are the kinds of things that I'd like us to talk about when we get together in 2 weeks. I want to.
Can I just make one proposal for 2 weeks for you to think about between now and then?
Sure.
Think about the implications of this economically.
Yeah.
Think about the implications on it. There was a question asked in the chat about existential, you know, risk to humanity. I look at it in many different ways, but I think one of the existential risks is I believe we've seen ourselves as the alpha. We're not the biggest, we're not the strongest, we're not the fastest animals on the planet. We can't merge ourselves into the background and camouflage. What has made us different? What do we think we're special about? It's been our ability, I believe, to reason, to be the alpha intellectual beings on this planet. What does it mean when we're no longer that?
Yeah.
What's the implications of that for humanity?
Yeah.
As we turn more and more things over to them, but now, you know, there's a point where we're not turning it over anymore. That's what we're talking about, you know, the agentry that's going on.
Sure.
So I think the broader issues are, what does this really mean for the nature of humanity? And Kurzweil talks about us merging with the computers in a singularity. I will say this, Kurzweil, in my 40 odd years of following him, has never been wrong, though I've never agreed with him when he made the statement. And you know, that's one direction.
Yeah.
What does this mean for humanity and our society? Economics, power balance. These are large issues on how this is going to affect us.
Well, let me just say, Bernhard, you've ignited a great conversation here today. I want to thank Bernhard for your presentation, but everybody who's been a participant in this discussion, this has been really wonderful. Really great stuff.